All right. Good evening, everybody. This is part 27 of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin. We are going to be on pages 13b and 14a this evening. I have shared the Gemara on my screen to your screen. If somebody at some point in the future wants a copy of this document or just wants to contact me, I am deborahclapper@gmail.com. By the way, for those of you who missed the occasional class, I'm sorry I had gotten behind in curating the YouTube channel, but I went in and labeled the last couple of months worth of this class and put everything in the playlist where it belongs. And I can send out the link to the playlist again if anyone wants. Just let me know. Okay, so last week we were talking about the bit where the Mishnah said that something called smichat zekenim, the placing of hands of the elders, requires presumably three rabbis, three judges. Last week we had been assuming that was talking about when the elders put their hands on the head of a sacrificial bull in the 4th chapter of Vayikra in last week's Parsha, when the entire community has committed a sin and you're doing communal tshuva for this sin, then the Edah, as described in the Torah, which the Gemara assumes means the Sanhedrin, offers a bull as a sacrifice, and the elders have to put their hands on the head of that sacrifice. And we last week worked on the assumption that's what the Mishnah was talking about. This evening we're going to complicate that, and then we're going to get distracted by a story. Okay, so we begin. Tana smicha smichat zkenim begin. So we have a Braita that says that both something called smicha and something called smichat zekenim is with 3. So for the moment, we're gonna not translate smicha. We're gonna just call it smicha. But it is the same word that last week I was translating placing of hands. The word appears too many times. It's too many syllables. So we're just gonna say smicha this evening. So the smicha and smicha of elders are both with 3. So it sounds like there are 2 different things called smicha that require 3 judges. So the Gemara reasonably wants to know, my smicha umay smichat zekenim. So what are these 2 things? What's smicha and what is smicha of elders? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, mismach sabi. So Rabbi Yochanan says that it's the smicha of or ordaining of elders / rabbis. Presumably what he means is you already know what one of them is. That's the thing we talked about before with the elders putting their hands on the head of the bull. You just want to know why there are 2 of them. So I'll tell you the other one is elders putting their hands on the heads of other elders, which is smicha of sabi, which is the plural of saba and means elders in Aramaic. Okay, so that though would indicate that in order to turn somebody into a rabbi, we need a panel of 3 judges. And we saw, I don't know, about 2 months ago, a discussion of giving people permission to judge separately in Babylonia and in Israel. In Babylonia, it was the exilarch's office that had the right to tell people who could judge. In the land of Israel, it was a little less clear who had any authority, but somebody did. But it didn't back there make any mention of a panel of 3 judges making that decision. And it sounds like we are now claiming that that's what's happening here. So, Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef, mismach sabi b'shlosha minal. So Abaye asked Rav Yosef, wait a minute, where would we even have a source that we need a panel of 3 for ordination?
Deborah?
Yeah.
What? Never mind 3. Why would we even need a Beit Din for something like that? I
think that's the same question as why do we need 3? If we only need 1, if you just need your teacher, to say, yes, this student knows all the stuff that I know, and I'm done teaching him, and he's now an expert. So that, I think, would be the same thing as saying you don't need a Beit Din, and saying you need 3 is the same thing as saying you do need a Beit Din. I think that they're the same thing.
Okay.
And the problem is that there's only one real paradigm in Tanakh for this, which is the one we're about to quote. So, Ilema midichti. So, Abaye is still talking. Abaye says, if you say that the source is from this pasuk in Bamidbar, Vayismoch et yadav alav, when Moshe is publicly appointing Yehoshua as his successor, and he puts his hands on Yehoshua. So, ihachi tiski bechad. If that's your source, then you only need one predecessor putting their hands on your head to turn you into an elder. You shouldn't need more than one. Or v'chitema Moshe b'makom shivim v'chad kai. Or, and we've seen this before, if you say Moshe represents the entire panel of elders of the time, which is to say himself plus the 70 elders, then ihachi libis shivim v'chad. In that case, if Moshe is representing 71 people, you should need 71 people to appoint a new elder. So we don't seem to have we could have a source for 71, we could have a source for 1, we don't seem to have a source for 3, and the Gemara basically shrugs its shoulders. Gotcha, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Rav Yosef's answer, if he gave one, is not recorded. And the Gemara doesn't have an answer. Okay. So maybe it requires 3, maybe it doesn't require 3. And if it requires 3, we don't seem to be entirely sure why it should require 3. Amarle Rav Acha Breda Ravel or Rav Ashi. So, but right now we're going to come back to the 1 versus 3 question, but first we need to be distracted a little bit. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, asked Rav Ashi, wait a minute, do we actually put our hands on people to ordain them? Is that a thing? Amarle, and he responded, nah. Samchin le bishma. We put a name on him. Kari le Rabbi. You call him Rabbi. V'yahavi le reshuta lemeidan dinei knas. So then you give him permission publicly to judge cases of fines. Okay, so we need to just mention here at this point that this is the title Rabbi, which appears on almost all of the titled people in the Mishnah, and on some of the titled people in the Gemara, and then not after that, is a title which indicates that you had this kind of smicha, which indicates an unbroken chain of tradition going back to Moshe. And as we will see a little bit later in the Gemara, you can't give this kind of smicha outside the land of Israel. And so once, because of Roman persecution, the Torah training situation in Israel fades away to almost nothing, and almost all of the Torah learning is happening in Babylonia, this title disappears as well, as does formal smicha. Right, so we today call, and have for some time called, the degree that we give people that then lets them use the title rabbi. We call that smicha, but the title we're conferring is actually not rabbi, it's actually rav. The English word rabbi comes from the New Testament, which was written in the time of the Mishnah, at a time when that's what you called people who learned Torah, because smicha still existed. And there were very few Jews speaking English between the expulsion of the Jews in the 13th century and the readmission of the Jews in the 19th century to England, and nobody asked our opinion, and they just kept using this obsolete word, and now we're kind of stuck with it in English. But the title we're actually giving people is Rav. And this kind of smicha that they're talking about here has not existed since, as I said, sometime in the vicinity of the 3rd or 4th century. And as a result, in theory at least, because being the title Rabbi, which goes with real smicha, which goes with an unbroken chain of ordination given in the land of Israel, that is associated with the ability to judge cases of fines. So in theory, at least, we don't judge cases, financial cases, about anything except who actually has who else's money. Now we don't judge, you did something wrong, so you have to pay extra kind of cases. And that's been a little bit of a problem for the last 2000 years, but we mostly get around it by doing it anyway. But in theory, we don't. Okay, and we will see as we go through this Gemara that judging cases in the laws of fines is going to be seen as synonymous with having real ordination. Okay, back on topic. V'chad de lo samich. Wait a minute. Is it really true that you can't have one who does smicha by themselves? And now we have a very, very famous story, although it does not, I will warn you, have a happy ending. V'ha amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. But Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Baram zachuro to ha'ish latov v'Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba Shma. Says that this guy is remembered for good, and his name is Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. She'ilmalehu lo nishtakhu dinei knaso miYisrael, because without him, the laws of fines would have been forgotten from the Jewish people. Note that the word Israel is used to mean the Jewish people. That is, until the founding of the state of Israel, very consistently what the word Yisrael means. But the Gemara says, wait a minute. Nishtachu? We would have forgotten the laws of fines? Nigrasinu, we'll learn them. That's not a problem. Forgetting is the sort of thing you can fix. You just open a book and you read. So it can't be that that's what Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba prevented. Ella bitlu dinei knaso miYisrael. But in fact, the laws of fines would have stopped being enforced. They would have stopped being used from Israel, in the same way as a few hundred years later, in fact, happened. Because
about this,
yeah,
I thought at this time the laws were all oral rather than not written down.
Okay. So on the one hand, it's probably true that there wasn't very much written down. But my guess would be that there are at least notes somewhere. But you may be right that what it really means is that in order to reconstruct it, you would have had to go around to all of the various not entirely qualified students and get them to recite everything that they knew in order to reconstruct it. But you could still reconstruct it without one person being qualified to know everything. You don't need a person with a degree or with a qualification in order to reconstruct information necessarily. You might need it, but you don't necessarily need it. But there's something else for which you actually do need the qualification, and they're suggesting, in fact, we would not have been able to judge laws of fines if we didn't have anyone with formal qualifications, even if we do know the information. And the qualification depends on one brave person being willing to do something that's illegal, as we'll see in a second. And this is a moment to express gratitude to the time and place, and especially the country that we live in which the public teaching of Torah is completely legal and nobody ever thinks of trying to prevent it. That is very different than the Roman Empire, and I'm very grateful to live in this time and place. Okay, so once the Roman Empire, presumably is the evil empire here, decreed an oppression against Israel, that anybody who gives smicha will be killed, and anybody who receives smicha will be killed. And any city in which smicha takes place will be destroyed. And the tchum in which people give smicha will be uprooted. Tchum here seems, at least it later seems to mean tchum Shabbat, which is the 2,000 amot, more or less, outside the city that you're allowed to walk around in on Shabbat. And I assume that uprooted means that they're going to come and rip up the food plants and fruit trees that are growing there to feed the city. So this is a really serious threat. It sounds like the Roman Empire has correctly deduced that we're running a shadow government here for a country that we think still exists and they think doesn't. And that is, to a significant extent, what the Sanhedrin was seen as being able to be. Whether it actually did it or not, I don't know, but we certainly dreamed of having it that way in the Mishnah. And so they're clamping down on that and treating people who participate in the perpetuation of the rabbinate as rebels, effectively. Okay, so Ma'asa Yehuda ben Bava. So what does Yehuda ben Bava do? And for some reason at this point he loses his title. I'm not really sure why. He went and he sat in between two mountains. It sounds like there's a supply of students who are qualified to get smicha. It doesn't sound like the actual education has been stopped, just the granting of degrees. So anyway, he goes and he sits between two big mountains, ubein shnei ayarot gedolot, and in between two big cities. Rashi says the reason why he's sitting equidistant between two cities is so that the Romans won't be able to punish either of them. Oh, that seems like a little bit of a gamble, because if the Romans want to badly enough, presumably they could punish both instead. But okay, uvein shnei tchumei Shabbat, and between two different tchum Shabbats. So they're not actually inside the environs of any settlement. Bein Usha Shifaram, they're between the city of Usha and the city of Shifaram. All I could find out of about Shifaram is that it's near Usha, which is not a helpful piece of information, so I don't actually know where this is. V'samach sham chamisha zkinim, and there Yehuda ben Baba gave smicha to 5 elders. The Elohim, and these are they: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosei, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamuel. So these 5 guys are supposed to perpetuate the rabbinate into the future, at a time when it sounds like there was a real concern it would disappear. So it may be that it was illegal long enough that a lot of the older generation was not expected to last much longer. I'm not sure exactly how much danger the rabbinate is in, but the story is that it was about to die out. Rav Avia Mosif af Rabbi Nechemia. Rav Avia said Rabbi Nechemia was also got his smicha at that moment from Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Unfortunately, kevan shehikiru ovehem behem. So once their enemies noticed them, amar lahem banai rutzu. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says to the 5 guys or 6 guys he's just given smicha to, my sons, run. Amrulo, they said to him, Rebbe, matei alecha, but Rabbi, what's going to happen to you? Amar lahem, so he said to them, hareini mutal lifnehem ke'even she'ein lo lahoftim. So I'm laid out in front of them like a rock that's so heavy that it can't be turned over. Nobody can turn it over, which seems to mean I'm stuck, but you get out of here. Amru, they said, and this seems to be the people telling the story, not the students. The students seem at this point to have run away. They don't seem to be there anymore. So they said, Lo zazu misham, they didn't leave there, meaning I guess the Roman soldiers didn't leave there. Ashenatsubo shlosh meot lunbiaut, although Jastrow thinks it should be read lunkiaut, maybe. Shel barzel. So they until there were 300 iron spearheads stuck in him. The asa uhu kikvara, and he was made like a sieve. Okay, that this is not a way you want a human being to be described. He's not only did they kill him, but it sounds like they went way, way overboard. These are the kinds of injuries that if we were writing a murder mystery, the pathologist doing the autopsy would say, it looks like there was a lot of emotion involved in this killing. Right? This is not, if they just wanted to execute him, they would not have stuck 300 spearheads into him. But one way or the other, he's dead now. But And the point of bringing all this in, though, was that it sounds in the story like it's Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba and the 5 or 6 guys that he's giving smicha to, and they're sitting there by themselves in this deserted valley in between cities and in between mountains, and that's it. They're the only ones there. And so that seems to imply that you only need 1 rabbi to do smicha, not 3. But the Gemara says, well, maybe not, because Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba achrini havu b'hadeh. Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, maybe he had other guys with him. V'haita lo chashiv lahu, and the fact that they weren't mentioned, mishum kvoda to Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. That's just to give honor to Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. So that's maybe, it could be, but it doesn't really seem fair, because there's supposing there are 2 other rabbis there, they're also in mortal danger, or dead, or maybe both. And it seems like not mentioning them in order to give honor to Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba doesn't really seem fair. Like, they also seem like heroes, and it would be nice to know who they were. So I'm not sure this is the pshat of the story, but in any case, you can't prove that 1 rabbi could do it, because based on the story we have, it could be that Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba had a couple of other rabbis with him, and that he didn't do this by himself. Okay, now we get distracted again. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba samche. Wait a minute. Is it really true that Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba is the one who gave smicha to Rabbi Meir? Amar Rabba bar bar Chana. But Rabba bar bar Chana said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan said, Kol ha'omer Rabbi Meir lo simchu Rabbi Akiva, eno ela toeh. All right, so Rabba bar bar Chana is supposed to have said that anybody who says that Rabbi Meir wasn't ordained by Rabbi Akiva, he is mistaken. Now, this kind of language that you use when you know that you're in an argument, and in fact, when you know that other people very likely are not going to agree with you. Another example that springs to mind is the Gemara that says anybody who says that David sinned with Bathsheba is only mistaken. It's the same language. And in the same way, it really seems like you're making a claim that's a little over the top, and you're making an assertion that your interlocutor must be making a mistake, which is a little bit over the top in order to support your a little bit over the top claim. So it sounds like there was a fight about this. In any case, and Rabbi bar bar Chana said that he's sure he's right, and the other people must be mistaken. So we decide that in fact you can't prove anything one way or the other, because it could be that Samche Rabbi Akiva velo kibla. Maybe Rabbi Akiva gave smicha to Rabbi Meir, but he wasn't accepted, because Rashi suggests because maybe he was too young. That would certainly go with his being educated enough, but people still not accepting him. And then later on, somebody else giving him smicha and it not being a problem anymore. If the problem is age, that does tend to go away with time. So it could also be that if Rabbi Akiva tried to give him smicha at a time and in a place when that was unremarkable, so no big deal, but then, people didn't want to accept it, so they didn't accept him. But then, now he becomes the hero who was willing to risk his life in order to get smicha to save the Jewish people and to save the Torah, and that makes him a lot more acceptable. So it also might just be that the circumstances are different. Either way, it seems like Rabbi Meir got smicha twice. The first time for Rabbi Meir, and then Samche Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba v'kiblo, and then Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba gave him smicha again, and this time the community accepted him. So we leave it sort of unresolved whether you really need 3. We don't have a source. The one story that we have only has one named rabbi, and oh wait, the person who got smicha from somebody else also only has one named rabbi in his story. It's just Rabbi Akiva. On the other hand, you can't ever prove that that doesn't mean Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba or Rabbi Akiva plus, 2 colleagues, and we're just only giving the name of the guy in charge. So you can't really know. But it seems like in each of these stories, there's only one rabbi anybody cares about giving the smicha. But whether they have to have 2 other rabbis standing next to them, that's less. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, ein smicha b'chutz la'aretz. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says there is no smicha outside of the land of Israel. Yomar says, wait a minute, my ein smicha, what do you mean there's no smicha? Does that mean that if somebody has smicha and they cross the border, now they don't have smicha anymore because there's no smicha in the outside of Israel? If you tell me that means that even people who have smicha, that they received properly in the land of Israel from whatever the process is, and that's still super vague and it's not going to get less vague. But even if these people have smicha, they now cross over out of the land. They're not allowed to judge laws of fines. That's not going to work. The Hatznan, because it says in the Mishnah, Sanhedrin noheged bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. The Sanhedrin can practice its existence both in the land and outside. And the Sanhedrin is kind of defined as a court of 71 guys with smicha. So if smicha didn't exist outside the land, the Sanhedrin couldn't exist outside the land either. And the fact that the Sanhedrin can function outside the land means that these rabbis must still have smicha after they've crossed the border. That can't be what we mean. Ella delo samchinan b'chutz la'aretz. It must be, in fact, that it means we don't give smicha outside of the land of Israel. Okay, so given that, pshita somchin b'chutz la'aretz v'nismachin ba'aretz ha'amrinan delo. So it seems obvious that if you have a case where the conferrers of smicha are standing outside the land and the recipients of the smicha are standing inside the land, that's what you're telling me doesn't work. And presumably, obviously, if everybody is standing outside the land, it doesn't work. However, Ella somchin ba'aretz v'nismachin b'chutz la'aretz mai. But what happens if you have the conferrers of smicha who are inside the land, and those who are supposed to receive smicha are outside the land? Then what happens? And this matters because there's a period of time when a very significant portion of Jewish life is happening in Babylonia, and a very significant portion of the Torah learning is happening in Babylonia. And there is still smicha in the land of Israel. There are still rabbis in the land of Israel, but not so many, and it's not so safe. So at that point, you might have wanted to send a list of names to the rabbis in Israel and say, could you, thank you, Kevin, conferees. Perfect. You might have wanted to be able to send a list of, this year's graduating class to the rabbis in the land of Israel and say, could you confer smicha on this list of people? We attest that they're qualified. And if that would work, it would actually probably be very helpful to the community in Babylonia. So we're asking, could such a thing work where the Torah learning is done in Babylonia, the rabbis are in fact in Babylonia, but there's a panel sitting in the land of Israel which confers smicha remotely. Not exactly spooky action at a distance, because it's not spooky, but I felt like saying that phrase anyway because I like Einstein and it was his birthday today. Anyway, so answer that question, we say Tashma. So come listen to this story, and this will help us understand. De Rabbi Yochanan hava mitzta'er alei, de Rav Shemen bar Abba, de lo hava gabayhu de lismachay. So we know that Rabbi Yochanan used to be unhappy that Rav Shemen bar Abba, notice his name is Rav Shemen bar Abba, it sounds like he never did get smicha because he does not have that yud on his title. So Rav Shimon bar Abba was not with Rabbi Yochanan, and so Rabbi Yochanan was not able to give him smicha. Rabbi Yochanan, incidentally, is one of our rabbis who travels back and forth between Babylonia and Israel. And I did not see anybody specifically saying this, but I don't remember how carefully I looked. It is plausible that Rabbi Shimon bar Abba is a student of Rabbi Yochanan while Rabbi Yochanan's in Babylonia. And now Rabbi Yochanan would like to be able to go back to the land of Israel and give him smicha, but Rabbi Shimon bar Abba doesn't or can't or something come back with him. So it sounds like that means he can't give him smicha because they're not together. And we have another story. Rabbi Shimon bar Zerud, v'chad de'im. So Rabbi Shimon bar Zerud and someone who was with him, Umanu Rabbi Yochanan ben Achmai. And who's the person who's with Rabbi Shimon bar Zerud? That would be Rabbi Yochanan ben Achmai. Excuse me. Or V'amrila. There's another version of the tradition, and this is clearly a story where we have most of the details, but the connective tissue connecting the details to each other has become fragile over time, and people are no longer sure exactly how to connect up the pieces. So the alternative version is Rabbi Yochanan ben Achmai, Bechad Di'ime, Umanu Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud. So alternatively, it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Achmai and someone who was with him, and who's that? That's Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud. Either way, it's the same two people. Chad Dehava Gabaihu Samchuhu, the one who was with them, they gave him smicha. And the guy who was not with them, they did not give smicha to. So it sounds like we are not using a legal derivation tool to find out the answer to our question. We're just looking at what happened. And it would seem that what happened was that in practical reality, if you were able to make the trip to Israel and your teacher was able to give you smicha in the land of Israel, then that's great, and you can get smicha. And if you are not in the land of Israel, you are not present at your own ordination ceremony, although it's less clear to me what happens if, say, I don't know, you're in Tiberia and the guy giving you smicha is in Yafo, but let's stick with outside, inside. If you're outside Israel and the people who want to give you smicha are inside Israel, it would seem that we have two stories in which rabbis wanted to give someone smicha, and in fact, in one case, conferred smicha on their chavruta, but were unable to confer smicha on the person who is stuck outside the land because they weren't physically present in Israel to get their ordination. Okay, that was a mouthful, although still not a 45-minute mouthful. I'm still working on getting the timing right, and I apologize for that. But are there questions? Okay. I will see you guys next Monday night. Have a wonderful Purim. Have a good Shabbos, and I will see you next week.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.